Khorne may not be the most complex of races, but that doesn't mean they are not crazy strong. Their 3 lords could easily make their way onto lists of the most powerful factions in the game, but that does beg the question, who's the best? Who can collect the most skulls, shed the most blood, and crown themselves as the best faction in Khorne? Let's get to ranking and find out. And if you want to find out how to avoid ads on these videos, it's by becoming a channel member. Just $1 a month for all the same videos with none of the ads. Now, onto the lords. In 3rd place, we have Arbol the Undefeated. Arbol's mechanic may not be the most overpowered, but it is hard to argue that it's not the most fun. Teleporting around the map, battling all kinds of factions and armies, and then dipping out before they can react is such a fun playstyle. The rewards are some decent buffs to all areas of the faction, and whilst they may not be extremely overpowered, they can still bring a lot of value. Aside from this, he specializes in making use of non-demonic units, making them cheaper to upkeep and faster and cheaper to build recruitment buildings for. It allows him to get some of the best and most consistent units in the roster a whole lot faster and cheaper, so nothing but a win if you ask me. He starts at the last tip of the Chaos Waste before it blends into Norsca, and it really doesn't even slightly matter. Once he beats his starting war, he'll be teleporting around the map anyway, so it doesn't really matter where he starts, since he'll spend essentially no time there. If you do want to do a spot of conquest with a secondary army, then he's got a pretty free area for gobbling up territory until you run into either Malachi or the Chaos Dwarves. His non-demonic specialization continues to his army. Quicker global recruitment for all units, which will come in handy more than you'd think with all his globetrotting. Extra weapon strength and Hellblade, which is pretty much the same thing, just means these units will be more deadly than ever. It's nothing super glamorous or exciting, but it gets the job done and brings him a nice boost in power compared to his other armies. His skill line is mainly buffs himself with a little boost for non-demonic units, and even unbreakable once they reach elite ranks. Replenishment in foreign territory is also pretty huge, and will get a ton of value when he's off gallivanting around the world. In combat, he's a much more powerful Chaos Lord of Khorne. He deals a ton of damage with great attack and weapon strength. He's also super tanky with good defense and excellent armor. Just an all-round melee superstar, with the only downside being he's a little bit slow with all that armor. However, toss him on a flesh hound and for the low price of 10 defense, he's super speedy and somehow deals even more damage. Now, I don't think Arbol is in any way weak. In fact, as far as armies go, he's probably the most consistent. Non-demonic units are simply better than demons, since they don't make like me and melt under the slightest amount of pressure. However, he simply lacks the potential to reach critical mass to the same degree as the other two. His mechanic is a crazy amount of fun, but the rewards it gives just aren't cracked enough to beat the others. This combined with his personal power ceiling make him the weakest. And by weakest, I mean the weakest in Khorne. He's still an extremely strong lord, but in the faction, I think he has to be at the bottom. In 2nd place, we have Skarbrand the Exiled. Skarbrand, of course, has the least in-depth mechanics of all the Khorne lords, but as the first to join the faction, it's fair enough. However, what he lacks in depth, he certainly doesn't lack in power. The unholy manifestations offer some decent powers to keep his army thirsty for blood, and even instantly raise settlements. They do rely on corruption to be spread throughout the world, and that comes down to how the AI is doing as well as you, but regardless, nice bonuses all game long. Outside of that, his faction effects make him extremely good at snowballing with his powerful and long-lasting blood hosts. Add on replenishment in enemy territory and he basically never stops ripping and tearing. His starting location on the border between the deserts and the Badlands is pretty much perfect for him. He's not going to be friends with anyone, so why not toss him into the middle of one of the largest brawls in the game. Plus, a starting war with savage orcs is pretty much the perfect matchup for his magical damage. And following that up with beastmen and vampires ain't half bad either. The only downside is the same as one of the upsides. The sheer number of potential enemies can become too much if you can't roll that snowball fast enough. That, combined with how physically large the area is, makes your territory massive but hard to defend. In battle, his most powerful army effect has to be the bonus skull kills from battles. By running down enemy armies and wiping them out, you can farm ungodly numbers of skulls to the point you'll run out of things to do with them. The bonuses for bloodthirsters and soul grinders are good and will absolutely get extra value, but they are a little bit more subtle and niche to be overly impactful. His unique skills mainly buff himself in various ways alongside his army on the campaign map. His units will remain much the same, so you are really relying on him to get a tremendous amount of value. That said, the final skill, giving even more units to Bloodhost, is pretty wacky, albeit still not for his own army. In combat, he's obviously absolutely crazy. Obscene amounts of damage with armor-piercing magical and fire, decent toughness with high defense and armor, very high speed so not much can outrun him. However, he has two major issues which can be his downfall. Firstly, his size is fairly massive, so he's an easy target for enemy ranged units. And secondly, the fact he's a demon. If his leadership shakes, then he will literally start to fall apart, and that's not a good look for a demon of blood and violence. Like I said at the start, Skarbrand is very simple, but that doesn't make him any less strong. In fact, it's actually the root of his strength, since you could hand Skarbrand to a total novice, and they'd probably raise the entire world by turn 10. The cycle of creating larger and larger blood hosts and using them to create more and more until you have more armies than you know what to do with is insanely powerful and takes essentially no effort to get value from. His snowball is one that takes a handful of turns to get moving, thanks to his ability to gather an inordinate amount of skulls in no time. And who can forget that Skarbrand himself is a destroyer of worlds with minimal effort. Large hitbox aside, there is very little that can stand up to him in combat, and the fact he'll only get better as the game goes on is something that should scare all other lords. With any other lord, his location will be a detriment, but for him, it is simply more skulls added onto the pile. And in first place we of course have Skulltaker. His main mechanic, the Cloak of Skulls, may have been somewhat nerfed since release, but it's still got some insane potential to spiral out of control. There's too many effects to list, but just hit the highlights: teleportation to enemy lords, huge stat buffs for Skulltaker, the ability to summon blood hosts every time you battle a lord and they basically never die, and a near infinite number of skulls. I could go on, but god damn, this mechanic is so busted that no amount of minor nerfing could ever change that. Oh, and he also has the same manifestations as Skarbrand, so add on everything that gives you to the pile. Aside from this, however, he doesn't have much else going for him. Cheaper Bloodletters is nice, Demons Reforged is just making demonic units moderately less shitty, and more Blood Reapers is neat but not game changing. Starting in the middle of Lustra is normally a downside, but honestly, all it really means is more lords to battle to power up the cloak. Plus, so many of them being legendary and powerful means you get tons of rewards and can start the snowball rolling in no time, and plus, once he gets his teleportation mechanic, it's really irrelevant where he starts. In battle, his army effects specialise in for seeking and hunting enemy armies. More movement range and more importantly, more vision allow him an insane level of insight as to what's going on around him. The frenzy for Bloodletters does help them deal a considerable amount of damage, but we're still talking demonic units, so once again, it's like taking a paracetamol after you've been cut in half by a train. His unique skill line has most of the buffs for himself, as well as skills to gain more skulls, add more units to blood hosts, and of course, more buffs for Bloodletters. Nothing crazy, but makes Skulltaker even more broken, and we haven't even talked about how he does in combat yet. Yeah, he's insanely strong. What do you want me to say? He's a much more powerful Herald of Khorne, which means he's an absolutely cracked melee lord. Crazy attack and weapon strength with fire, magical armor piercing, and anti-infantry damage. Decent toughness, but nothing crazy, so can eventually be taken down. Add on his choices of a Blood Throne or a Juggernaut, both of which make him even better, and he is not a hard lord to get absolutely crazy value with. It's really hard to argue that Skulltaker isn't the best lord in Khorne. You could say he's less simple than Skarbrand, but we're essentially comparing pressing a single button to pressing two, so it hardly matters. Now, I will grant you that Skulltaker's snowball takes significantly longer to come online. The really overpowered effects of the Cloak of Skulls aren't until pretty late in the tree, so he's weaker early on. However, the heights he reaches once he gets there far surpass anything Skarbrand could ever dream of. Skarbrand's entire gimmick is blood hosts, and eventually Skulltaker gets even better than him at that, so the only argument is in battle prowess. Skulltaker is still brilliant even if he's not as destructive as a giant demon. However, his versatility still makes him the better choice. When you add up everything Skulltaker can do, he simply is the best and most powerful lord in Khorne. Once he gets on a roll, he's an avalanche that will bury the map in an ungodly number of armies and is essentially impossible to stop. But what I want to know is, who do you think is the best lord in Khorne? Let me know in the comments below, like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 rankings, then check out this video all about the best campaign for every faction.